This briefing of the Committee on Foreign Affairs will come to order.
Distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today. The urgent problem that I wish to address concerns the state of human rights at the United Nations. The UN Human Rights Council this year undergoes a review of its first 5 years of work. How has it performed? Let's first recall the history. In 2005, then UN Secretary General Kofi Annan called to scrap the old Human Rights Commission. He explained why. Countries had joined, quote, not to strengthen human rights, but to protect themselves against criticism or to criticize others. The Commission was plagued by politicization and selectivity. It suffered from declining professionalism and a credibility deficit, which, quote, cast a shadow upon the reputation of the UN system as a whole. To remedy these fatal flaws, the UN created the Council 1 year later. The 2006 resolution promised a membership committed to human rights that would respond to severe abuses, including by urgent sessions. Its work would be impartial and non-selective. Today, 5 years later, we ask, has the Council redressed the shortcomings of its predecessor? Has it lived up to its promise? Let us consider first the Council's current members. They include Bangladesh, China, Cuba, Pakistan, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. The newest member is Libya, under the dictatorship of Colonel Gaddafi. As measured by Freedom House, 57% of the members fail to meet basic democracy standards. Mr. Chairman, imagine a jury that includes murderers and rapists, or a police force run in large part by suspected murderers and rapists who are determined to stymie investigation of their crimes. That was said by Kenneth Roth of Human Rights Watch in 2001, but the analogy applies even more today. Second, let's look at the Council's response over the past 5 years to the world's worst human rights violations. Here's what we find. For the 1/5 of the world's population living in China, where millions have suffered gross and systematic repression, for the minority Uyghurs who have been massacred, the Tibetans killed, the Council adopted not a single resolution. Its response was silence. For the peaceful civic activists, bloggers, and dissidents in Cuba who are beaten or languish in prison, no resolutions. For the victims of Iran, massacred by their own government while the Human Rights Council was actually in session, subjected to torture, rape, and execution, no action. For the women of Saudi Arabia, subjugated, the rape victims sentenced to lashes, the Council looked away. For the people of Zimbabwe, who suffer under the jackboot of the Mugabe regime, no resolutions. Mr. Chairman, apart from a handful of exceptions, the UN Human Rights Council, in the 5 years of its existence, has systematically turned a blind eye to the world's worst abuses. It has failed the victims most in need. You may ask then, what does it do with its time? I will tell you. To an astonishing degree, the Council has reserved its moral outrage for demonizing one single country, Israel, the only liberal democracy in the Middle East. Consider, 1. In total, the Council has adopted some 50 resolutions condemning countries. Of these, 35 have been on Israel, i.e. 70%. All have been one-sided condemnations that grant impunity to Hamas and Hezbollah terror and to their state sponsor, the Islamic Republic of Iran. 2. Built into the Council's permanent agenda as a special item on Israel, no other country is singled out in this fashion. 3. The Council's machinery of fact-finding missions exists almost solely to attack Israel. The most notorious example is the Goldstone Report, a travesty of justice that excoriated Israel and exonerated Hamas. This was not surprising, given that the mission operated according to a prejudicial mandate, a predetermined verdict, and with members like Christine Chinkin, who declared Israel guilty in advance. 4. Out of 10 special sessions that criticized countries, 6 were on Israel, 4 for the rest of the world combined. 5. The Council has a permanent investigator, Richard Falk, mandated solely to report on, quote, Israel's violations of the principles of international law. Mr. Falk also happens to be one of the leading proponents in this country of the conspiracy theory that the 9/11 terrorist attacks were an inside job orchestrated by the U.S. government. Now, in response to our protest last week, I'm pleased to report that yesterday the Secretary General sent me a letter stating that he condemns the preposterous remarks of Mr. Falk and regards them as an affront to the memory of the 3,000 victims that perished that day. We call on Mr. Ban Ki-moon to take action to remove Mr. Falk immediately. Mr. Chairman, the The promises of the Council's founding resolution, improved membership, action for victims, an end to politicization and selectivity, have not been kept. On the contrary, if we consider the fatal flaws identified by Kofi Annan in the old Commission, every single one applies equally today to the new Council. Thank you.
Mr. Neuer, thank you very much for your testimony, and having worked with you, thank you for your leadership at the UN.